as we know so far, we've talked about telling and the move towards asking, it being right at the fundamental start of what managing in a coaching style is all about. So let's move very quickly then to a model that's going to set the scene, I think, and I hope will be useful in understanding when it is we should continue to be telling, directing, leading, when it is we perhaps could be mentoring. Somewhere there's a bit of a mix between coaching and telling, a bit of a mixture there, to something much purer, managing in a coaching style where we're switched almost entirely to questions rather than telling. So we're going to put the model up on the screen for you now, and if you have a look at that, what we're talking about and looking at is a line that moves from bottom left to top right, and that line represents a person. Let's say it might be somebody who works for you, a person's independence from you as their manager, their ability to independently work without support. So that's the vertical axis on the left hand side, and if you look at the horizontal axis and over towards the right, we're looking at an increase in an individual's development. Now that development here is in a work context. It could be any context really, but it's in a work context, and it's not just about learning skills, it's not just about experience, it's actually learning how to use our heads better and how to mature as individuals so that our social skills are greater, our emotional skills are greater, and as human beings then that we have much more impact in the world. And obviously if we have more impact, then we can get more performance out of people via that impact. And that goes for the people who work for us. As they move towards the right hand side of that curve and move up in their independence from us as managers, so they have more impact and so they act more as role models for other people within the team. So it is, if you like, a fantastic way of getting culture change. Culture change, why do I say that? It's because culture is about behaviours, it's about the observable stuff. And when we manage in a coaching style, what we're coaching to is behaviours. We can see the results of our coaching intervention in the behaviours that appear in front of us. So here we have a model then for measuring not only individual growth and change and individual independence from us as managers, but we also have, if you like, a mechanism for changing culture over time. And my organisation has been doing this for, say, over 6 years plus, working in lots of organisations in putting in this style of managing into existing organisations. Not changing managers, not changing to one-size-fits-all types of management, but that word style is important. We're talking about a management style which is a move towards coaching, and that sits over and above the skills, the experience, the ability, the character, those tangibles and intangibles that all of us bring to our work as managers. Now this model, you can see, is split into three parts. Let's start from, say, the right hand side. You can see there that the individual is more independent from us, is very competent. They've grown as individuals, very well developed as well. And in that zone then, we really, I think, ought to be thinking about just returning questions with questions most of the time. And when we do that, trying to challenge, to listen, to help support people to find their own solutions. And their own solutions, like our own solutions, are likely to be far more motivating to them than something we just give them on a plate. Now, I suppose at this point say that, well, we don't always ask questions with questions. There's certainly one scenario in which we don't do that, and that's if it's urgent, if it's vital. If no circumstances, asking a question with a question, it's going to be slower, it's going to take time. So, you know, if there's blood on the floor, if something needs to go off with a courier in 3 minutes, asking questions is probably not going to do the trick. So we can revert pretty much to directive behaviours for that episode. And sometimes it may be necessary to come back after that directive episode if we've potentially upset people, get them back on side, explain what the scenario was, explain why it was important, apologise, and then move on. So in the middle section then of that curve, we've got an area where people are less capable and less well developed, less independent from us in a particular context. In some areas we might find they're actually moving up or moving down, but in a particular area of their work they may be struggling a bit. So then we can move from pure coaching, questioning intervention to something that I said before was like a mixture. So it's a bit like telling, a bit like questioning, and a mixture. So we can tell stories, we can give examples, we can offer a little bit of information, add some context to see whether they can move, having got that context, some more understanding, can then answer questions which will put them back onto the right hand side of that curve again. If they can't, we just offer them more information. And that brings us then down to the lower third then, where people are finding it difficult to get the context because they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the experience, the language you're using may be a little bit foreign to them, because you have the expertise, because you have that experience, and they're struggling. Sometimes the mouths may even just drop open. And in those circumstances, well, we move down in response to it by offering some direction, by giving a lot more context, but by giving sources and resources for information outside, inside, colleagues and so forth, in order to get what they need in order to move on. And it might just be a list, A, B, C, D, E, F, go and do that, and then come back and then we'll take it from there. I'll talk briefly also about the left-hand side of the vertical axis, which is where sort of counselling, psychotherapeutic stuff takes place. An individual may well be suffering at work, could be crying at work, absenteeism is likely to be higher, in extreme cases maybe self-harming, for example, and in those cases as managers normally we're not qualified, and even if we are qualified we don't normally have a remit for providing the sort of long-term emotional support that's required in that area, and that's why it's put purposefully over to the extreme left of the curve. Now, what does this model tell us? I think it tells us that we can afford to go to work with our existing coaching skills as of today and start from managing in a coaching style, in other words, from the right-hand side, make the assumption for most of the people, most of the time, that we can answer questions with questions, we can seek to ask questions and not impart our knowledge and our experience directly to people in order to get them to think, to be more independent, to make their own decisions, and to be more self-motivating, to have successes and to build their self-confidence, and to do that on a repeatable basis so that it's not only sustainable, but it builds their self-esteem as well. So now we're talking about going into work differently tomorrow with a different mindset and saying, okay, tomorrow I'm not going to answer questions, I'm going to answer questions with questions in the same way that Sam was talking in the first video, in order to try and stimulate this growth of competence and resourcefulness, tenacity, all of those factors in the people who are around us. Now notice I say people around us because of course these skills can be used with our peers and they can be used with our bosses and other stakeholders as well. What I'd like to do then is to just recap on the main things that we've got from that. We have a model that enables us to know when we should be managing in a coaching style, in other words not telling but asking questions, and making the assumption for most of the people, unless they're just fresh in today and don't know their way around, that most of the people, most of the time, can find out for themselves by asking the right questions what their next task should be, what the next step should be, how to motivate that, what extra resources they need, simply by asking questions which bring that stuff to the surface. And that if people are struggling, if the mouths drop a little bit or they look a bit perturbed, we can move to a sort of mentoring interventions in the middle, and ultimately if that still is beyond them, their experience and their knowledge is not good enough, then we can move to more resources, more information to the left-hand side. So that, if you like, is the summary of that model and its importance to managing in a coaching style, and also, of course, underlining that point that we can, as Sam's boss did, is to move very, very much to the right-hand side of that graph. In other words, to ask questions as a habit from the moment you move into work tomorrow. Now, there's a great benefit in that. A lot of managers go to work after doing coaching courses, let's say. They go to work and about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and think, oh, I should have done that with X. Didn't do it. What this model is suggesting, and we know from experience that it works, is that you can go in and ask the questions from day one. You're then, if you like, beginning to start with your new coaching, managing style from the beginning of the day, and of course you're then imprinting it through the rest of the day. It's not something you have to take on, it's becoming habit forming, you're getting lots of experience with it, and of course your learning curve is a lot faster. I know there will be those that have a little reticence to say, oh, someone's going to think I've been on a training course and it's all changed. But the fact is, as we shall see later when we talk about listening, questions and silence in the next video, that when people go into processing, when we stimulate them to process by asking questions, is they are going into different types of silence space in here. So the activity, it might be very short silences, quite intellectual, but there's processing happening, intellectual processing, and there may be other types of more deeper processing that goes on, which we're going to describe later as well. And while all that process is going on internally, people have less scope for judging you and wondering where you're coming from. So that ability to ask questions and keep asking questions, if you like, keeps people in their heads and less judgmental about you. Now, obviously later on in the series, a lot later in this series, we'll be looking at difficult characters in people, some of the more tricky people that you might have to deal with, and how to deal with them too. But that's a bit early for this video, and we'll come to that later.